few years ago, my friends and I went on this cave exploring trip that still gives me chills. It wasn't anything official, just a group of us who thought it would be fun to check out some remote caves that Mike had heard about from a guy he used to work with. He said the caves were way off the beaten path, way out in the wilderness. There were 5 of us going: me, Mike, Sarah, Chris, and Tom. We all liked hiking and had been camping before, so we didn't think twice about it. We packed our gear: flashlights, ropes, snacks, and some basic climbing equipment. Nothing too fancy. Mike said the entrance to the caves was hard to find, and we'd need to hike for at least a few hours through thick woods to get there. And that was part of the appeal. It felt like an adventure. We left early in the morning, parked at the edge of a state park, and started hiking. The forest was dense, but the weather was clear, and we were in good spirits. It wasn't long before we were deep into the woods, far from any signs of civilization. No phone service, no trails, just us in the wilderness. After a few hours, we found the cave entrance. It wasn't much more than a narrow opening at the base of a rock formation, half hidden by bushes. It looked untouched, like no one had been there in a long time. We squeezed inside one by one, and almost immediately, the temperature dropped. Inside, it was cool, damp, and completely silent, except for the occasional drip of water. It was eerie, but in an exciting way. We started exploring deeper, crawling through tunnels and climbing over rocks. The cave was bigger than we expected, with long, twisting passages that seemed to go on forever. It was exciting, and for the first couple of hours, we were all laughing, enjoying the adventure. But the deeper we went, the more disorienting it became. Our flashlights barely cut through the darkness, and we realized how easy it would be to get lost down there. Still, we pressed on, determined to find the main chamber Mike had heard about. We entered a large, open space, and immediately I felt something was wrong. There was animal bones scattered on the ground. Chris joked about it being some kind of caveman dinner spot, but the joke didn't land. We all felt uneasy, and Sarah said she thought she'd heard something, like footsteps, echoing from deeper in the cave. We ended up chalking it up to just being our own sounds bouncing around in the weird acoustics. After another hour of exploring, we decided to turn back. That's when we noticed something. We were no longer alone. We were backtracking through a tight tunnel when Mike, who was leading, stopped dead in his tracks. I bumped into him, annoyed at first until I saw his face. His flashlight was pointed down a side tunnel where something was moving. Not an animal. It was a person, but not like any person I'd ever seen before. This figure was barely clothed, covered in mud and filth with its head tilted, watching us. We froze, none of us sure what to do. Then, in the dim light of our flashlights, we saw more of them. 2, 3, maybe 4 figures emerging from the shadows deeper in the tunnel. All of them were filthy and feral looking. Mike whispered for us to move slowly. We turned around, but the tunnel we came from, where we thought we'd be safe, was now blocked by another one of those things. He was crouched, gripping a long, jagged stick-like weapon. It was clear they'd been following us for a while, maybe even herding us deeper into the cave. We didn't know where to go, and the cave's narrow passages made it impossible to just run. Sarah started crying quietly, and I could feel the walls closing in. Mike was the only one trying to keep it together. He whispered, "We'll go back through the other passage. Move slow and don't make a sound." We didn't run because we knew there was nowhere to run. But then one of them let out this loud shouting noise, and suddenly they moved, fast. I'll never forget the sound of their bare feet slapping against the wet cave floor as they rushed at us. Mike yelled for us to move, and we all scrambled forward, not caring anymore about staying quiet. I could hear Sarah sobbing, and Chris was shouting something, but none of it mattered. We just needed to get out. We reached the larger chamber we'd passed earlier, and Mike shouted for us to climb the rocks. It was the only way up, the only place they couldn't reach us immediately. We started climbing, hands slipping on the wet rocks, hearts pounding in our chest as they gathered below us. We were stuck now and cornered, perched on the rocks, and the exit was nowhere in sight. The figures circled the base of the rock formation, eyes glinting in the dim light of our flashlights. I could see now that they weren't just wild. There was something darker, something twisted about them. They were human, but barely. They'd been living down there, in the darkness, in the isolation, for who knows how long. Mike looked at me, panic written all over his face, and said, "We need to make a run for it. When they scatter, we all have to go." I nodded, though I had no idea how we were going to escape. And then, as if they could understand us, the wild men started climbing the rocks. That's when I heard Sarah scream. I looked over and saw one of them grabbing at her ankle, pulling her down. Mike swung at it with his flashlight, cracking it in the head, but it didn't even flinch. We realized we had no choice. We jumped off the rocks and ran. I don't know how we made it out of there, but somehow we found the tunnel that led back to the entrance. We burst out into the daylight, gasping for air, our clothes torn, covered in dirt and blood. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. It took hours for everyone to start calming down as the adrenaline wore off. And after some time had passed, we all had an intense discussion. And as a group, we decided that we would never report it. Because who would believe something like that? Who would believe that there are wild people living in those caves, living off the land, and waiting for anyone foolish enough to wander too deep?